to the September 7th, 2021 regular session of Findlay City Council. Check. All right. That's a little better. Silence in honor of the 20th anniversary of 9/11 and all the victims and survivors.
Mr. Greeno, Mr. Haas, Mr. Hellman, Mr. Niemeyer, Mr. Palmer, Mr. Russell, Mr. Schindelbacher, Mr. Slough, Ms. Warnicki, and Mr. Wobser.
Present.
Letter from City Auditor Sajak regarding resolution of financial
Questions or comments?
City Income Tax Monthly Collections Report for August 2021.
Questions or comments?
City Planning Commission agenda for September 9th, 2021, as well as the minutes of August 12th. Findlay Fire Department activities report for August 2021. Letter from City Engineer Crawford regarding Ohio Public Works Commission grant application, Webster Avenue water line replacement, project number 357101. Letter from City Engineer Crawford regarding community development block grant application, fire protection facility, project number 219949. Letter from City Engineer Crawford regarding airport terminal building repairs, project number 35212900. Letter from City Engineer Crawford regarding bus training earthwork for municipal.
Comments? Mr. Russell. Yeah, the testimony one would be a good one to move along. That is a weather testimony. Any additional questions or comments?
Traffic Commission minutes for August 16th, 2021.
Questions or comments? Minutes to be filed.
Letter from Service Safety Director Martin regarding airport jet fuel sales.
Questions or comments? Mr. Russell. Fuel sales, the fuel cost is up. Coming in multiple times. We had more sales than normal, which is a good thing. So we did see that we were able to buy the fuel for people, to put in the tanks for people to actually buy the gas. So we're selling more than anticipated compared to cost. Expectation. The big part of this is the appropriation process. When you appropriate the budget to buy fuel,
appropriations process.
Mr. Russell? And do you need this to happen tonight so that we can continue to purchase fuel for our cargo companies?
Ideally, yes. We're going to get into probably the second week of October, and then we'd be in a real problematic situation. So ideally, if we could move along, that'd be great.
Any other questions or comments? Letter to be filed.
Findlay Police Departmental Activities Report for August 2021.
Questions or comments? Report to be filed.
Letter from Mayor Murn regarding City Planning Commission appointment. This does not require council's confirmation.
Questions or comments? Letter to be filed. Committee reports.
The Strategic Planning Committee met on August 17th, 2021 to continue requests for proposals discussions. We recommend that council approve the RFP as submitted.
Mr. Wilson?
Make a motion to accept the committee report.
Second, Mr. Green, discussion? Mr. Wilson?
Just a reminder to council tonight that this will come up for its second reading. We need to, unless there's an objection, to go ahead and suspend the third reading and pass this tonight.
Any other questions or comments? All those in favor of the committee report say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. The committee report is approved.
The Streets, Sidewalks, and Parking Committee met on August 17th, 2021 to discuss a request to remove the 2-hour parking restrictions on East Lima Street. We recommend to take down the 2-hour parking signs on the south side of East Lima Street and take down the one no parking sign on the south side of Lima Street, and to keep the no parking signs for sight distance from intersections.
Mr. Russell.
Move for acceptance of the committee report.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion? All those in favor of the committee report say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? That is approved.
The Street, Sidewalks, and Parking Committee met on August 17, 2021 to discuss a request to remove the 2-hour parking restrictions on West Crawford Street. We recommend removing the 2-hour parking signs on the south side of West Crawford Street from Liberty to Southwest Street.
Mr. Russell.
Move for approval of the committee report.
Second, Mr. Niemeyer. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the committee report say aye. Those opposed, nay. Aye. Any nays? Committee report is approved.
The Water and Sewer Committee met on September 1st, 2021 to discuss fee waivers for Blue Bonnet Drive and Bittersweet Drive. We recommend to waive tap fees for all current property owners within 5 years from the project completion.
Mr. Greenwood.
Move for approval of the committee report.
Second, Mr. Schimmeldecker. Discussion? Mr. Russell.
While we are recommending fee waivers in this specific situation, there were some unique circumstances that caused this. And it was really tantamount to communications issues between the city and what the health department told the residences in this case. This is really a non-standard request, and it isn't something that we don't want this to be precedence for future sanitary extensions. It was simply a case where we're trying to do right by these property owners who were given some very mixed signals, and the committee, when going forward with this project initially, was also given some mixed information that might have affected how we went forward. So I would ask that the council approve this and approve the legislation that will be required to make this fee waiver go through.
Any other discussion or questions? Mr. Niemeyer.
It says within 5 years from the project. Why is that for people who want to sell their properties?
Well, it's limited to current property owners, so if the property is sold, the offer does not transfer to the new property owner. There's a limit on it because we felt that was proper. In essence, it gives a resident 5 years to tap onto the sewer line regardless of the condition of their septic system, and we thought 5 years was ample amount of time to plan for that expense.
Other questions or comments? Mr. Hellman.
If I may, does this breakdown in communication then get corrected from this point going forward?
If I may answer that, talk to that, in the committee reports as well as with the stakeholders involved between the health department and the city, taking actions to make sure that we have a process in place moving forward so history does not repeat itself. So we are prepared, and we're already putting, between the health department, bringing things together, working as a guest to this committee, and working in collaboration so this situation will not repeat itself.
All right, thank you, Mr. Myers.
Any other questions or comments? All those in favor of the committee report say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. The committee report is adopted. Legislation, we'll start with resolutions.
First reading for Resolution 17, 2021, a resolution accepting the amounts and rates as determined by the Budget Commission and authorizing the necessary tax levies and certifying them to the county auditor.
Reminder that this is on your add-ons tonight. There was some verbiage that was changed, so this requires one reading. Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of resolution 017-2021.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of resolution 17-2021, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
And Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
The resolution is adopted.
First reading for Resolution 18-2021, a resolution designating certain financial institutions as public depositories for city funds and declaring an emergency.
Okay. Ordinances.
Third reading for Ordinance 2021-71, an ordinance authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to enter into an agreement with the village of Genera for services to administer, enforce, and collect taxes levied by Genera under their village income tax on certain incomes of residents, non-residents, net profits of residents, and net profits of non-residents, business entities, in accordance with said village income tax and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Russell. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the ordinance, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Haas.
Aye.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
And Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Third reading for ordinance 2021-75, an ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the city of Findlay, Ohio, to waive formal advertising and bidding and enter into an agreement with Harold E. Shuck Incorporated for repairs in the city of Findlay Water Pollution Control Center roofs and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Greeno.
Motion to approve ordinance number 2021-075.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of ordinance, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman.
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer.
Aye.
Mr. Palmer.
Aye.
Mr. Russell.
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker.
Aye.
Mr. Slough.
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki.
Aye.
Mr. Wobser.
Aye.
Mr. Greeno.
Aye.
And Mr. Haas.
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-77, an ordinance authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to accept permanent ownership of 3 properties totaling 7 parcels from the Hancock County Board of County Commissioners as required under FEMA FMA fiscal year 14 and FMA fiscal year 16 to the city of Findlay, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Okay, next.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-78, an ordinance authorizing the mayor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to submit a request for proposal to the 4 qualifying firms previously chosen through the request for qualifications process who can perform the services for the city of Findlay's strategic plan process and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion that council's rules be suspended and this ordinance be given its third reading.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Discussion? No discussion under this procedure. All those in favor of suspending the rules, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Niemeyer?
That's okay.
How about Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended and the clerk will give the ordinance its third reading.
Ordinance 2021-78.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Discussion? All those in favor of the ordinance, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-79, an ordinance authorizing the auditor of the city of Findlay, Ohio to waive formal advertising and bidding and enter into an agreement or agreements with Tyler Technology to acquire additional software and equipment related to payroll processing of the City of Findlay's current Tyler payroll system, appropriating and transferring funds, and declaring an emergency.
Okay, next.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-83, an ordinance amending chapter 1100 et sec of the codified ordinances of the City of Findlay, Ohio, known as the zoning code, by rezoning the following described property referred to as the Deer Ridge Mobile Home Park, which previously was zoned MH Mobile Home, to M2 Multiple Family High Density, with the northeast corner of 9.66 acres being zoned as I-1 Light Industrial.
Okay, next.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-84, an ordinance amending chapter 1100 et sec of the codified ordinances of the City of Findlay, Ohio, known as the zoning code, by rezoning the following described property referred to as 812 Tiffin Avenue rezone, which previously was zoned R3 Small Lot Residential, to C1 Local Commercial District.
Okay, next.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-85, an ordinance vacating a certain portion of a certain alley, hereinafter referred to as the Coventry Drive Vacation, in the City of Findlay, Ohio.
Okay, next.
Second reading for ordinance 2021-86, an ordinance authorizing the mayor of the City of Findlay, Ohio, to enter into a purchase agreement for the acquisition of property located within the City of Findlay, Ohio limits, and declaring an emergency.
Okay, next.
First reading for ordinance 2021-87, an ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and city engineer of the City of Findlay, Ohio, to execute the necessary grant application or applications and/or agreements to receive grant funds from the Ohio Public Works Commission for the Rector Avenue Waterline Replacement Project number 357-10100, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
Yes, this is common, now turning into common practice when we are simply applying for grants. We suspend readings, and so for that reason, make a motion that council statutory rules be suspended in ordinance 2021-087 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Just, all those in favor of suspending the rules, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wilkser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2021-87, ordinance 2021-87.
Mr. Wobser.
Make a motion to approve ordinance 2021-87.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wilkser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
And Mr. Russell?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2021-88, an ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the City of Findlay, Ohio, to execute the necessary grant application or applications and/or agreements to receive grant funds from the Community Development Block Grant Program for the second phase of the Strict Facility, project number 3199490, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell.
For the same reasons as the previous ordinance, I move that the council statutory rules be suspended in ordinance 2021-088 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Palmer. All those in favor of suspending the rules say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wilkser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
And Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2021-88, ordinance 2021-88.
Mr. Russell.
Move for adoption of ordinance 2021-088.
Second, Mr. Schindeldecker. Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wilkser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
And Mr. Slough?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2021-89, An ordinance appropriating and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Okay, next.
First reading for ordinance 2021-90. An ordinance authorizing the mayor, service safety director, and/or city engineer of the city of Findlay, Ohio, to waive formal advertising and bidding requirements and enter into a contract or contracts with George Masonry Restoration for tuck pointing brickwork repairs on the city of Findlay municipal building and declare an emergency.
Mr. Russell?
As per the conversations with Jeremy earlier tonight, I would move that council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2021-090 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Ms. Warnicki. All those in favor of suspending the rules, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2021-90, ordinance 2021-90.
Mr. Greeno?
Motion to approve ordinance number 2021-090.
Second, Mr. Hellman. Any discussion or questions? Mr. Wobser?
Jerry, this is another situation where we're going in a no bid situation. It's not something that we like to do. I understand completely why we're doing it in both instances, but I want to make sure that going forward we try to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah, we were trying to avoid that on this one as well. With the amount of work and scheduling as it is, if we tried to go to a couple of different contractors, they all turned the work down, so we eventually went back to George Masonry and they could complete the work, so.
Yeah, quite honestly, I'm surprised you found somebody to do it at all.
You and me both.
given where we're at in the construction business right now, so I'm glad we did, don't get me wrong, but hopefully in the future we won't have to. Thank you.
I agree, thank you.
Any other questions or discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the ordinance, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
And Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted.
First reading for ordinance 2021-91, an ordinance appropriating funds and transferring funds and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Russell?
As per the conversations with Mr. Martin and Jim, I would move that council statutory rules be suspended and ordinance 2021-091 be given its second and third reading.
Second, Mr. Niemeyer. All those in favor of suspending the rules, say aye. If your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
The rules of council have been suspended, and the clerk will give the ordinance its second and third reading.
Ordinance 2021-91, ordinance 2021-91.
Mr. Wobser?
Make a motion to approve ordinance 2021-91.
Second, Mr. Palmer. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of ordinance, say aye. After your name is called, those opposed, nay.
Mr. Hellman?
Aye.
Mr. Niemeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Palmer?
Aye.
Mr. Russell?
Aye.
Mr. Schindeldecker?
Aye.
Mr. Slough?
Aye.
Ms. Warnicki?
Aye.
Mr. Wobser?
Aye.
Mr. Greeno?
Aye.
Mr. Haas?
Aye.
The ordinance is adopted. Old business. New business. Mr. Russell?
Planning and zoning this Thursday, September 9th, in the council office. We have one case that should be relatively quick.
Mr. Stashak?
Yes, thank you. You have your CAFRs, your financial reports tonight. Should you not want the paper copy and for the general public, it has been posted on the city's website so they can download it from online. Second thing is I distributed the proposed budget schedule. I'd like to see if I can get an affirmation of a pre-budget meeting for you, our annual pre-budget meeting. If you can believe it's that time of year already. I'd like to do it before your next council meeting, so we keep the budget stuff on schedule. That'd be on the 21st of September at 5:30 p.m. I proposed, and that works for the deputy auditor, so that's a good fit for us, it's a good fit for you.
Any other new business? I've got one piece. I'd like to welcome back Mr. Hellman after a short illness. It's good to see you. You're looking great.
Delighted to be here, thank you.
Yeah. Ms. Mayor.
Just have a couple of items to run through with you. So that you're aware, and the auditor and I are going to be trying to work through a couple of questions and concerns on the timekeeping legislation. Obviously, that decision to change timekeeping has a significant impact operationally on our departments potentially. So need to better understand that before I'd be able to support that legislation. So if we're not able to work through those concerns over the next couple of weeks, maybe asking you to table that legislation until we can work through those. So just wanted to make you aware of that so it isn't a surprise if needed. Additionally, hopefully you saw, and we'll be sharing across our social media, that the City of Findlay has coordinated in conjunction with safety services across the community a 9/11 memorial event, which will be held this Saturday, September 11th, as part of the 20th anniversary recognition of the terrorist attack on the United States. That will begin with a short parade from Lake Cascades down Main Street to Sandusky and out to the old Millstream Center, where there will then be a brief memorial service. I think it'll be a great event. I'm excited to be able to share that with the community. Following that memorial, then there will be the Touch-a-Truck. So seems kind of like a strange juxtaposition, but wanted to be an opportunity that's kind of family friendly for folks to come and remember those events in their way, but also have the opportunity to talk to it about potentially children or grandchildren, and recognizing that that's an important part of our country's history. Additionally, we'll send out more details, but I realize we haven't necessarily talked about this recently because we've been just boots on the ground. And we did hire a new assistant city engineer, Lee, who's been working with Jeremy for a couple of weeks now. As you can see, Jeremy probably looks happier and healthier. And we're really chugging along. So if you see Lee around, he's doing a great job, and excited for what he'll bring to the team. Additionally, we did promote Kyle Inbody to airport coordinator. Kyle has been working in our zoning department. He actually has a degree in aviation management, I believe is the correct title. So he is currently in process. He's working part-time at the airport so that he's working under Matt and learning those operations, but also providing support for zoning since it is still their busy season. And we'll be working through a full transition plan the rest of the year to bring Kyle into that role, and then looking at the structure of the zoning department moving forward. Thank you for the support of strategic planning. I will get that distributed tomorrow and include you guys on the communication. Excited to see that move forward. Additionally, as part of the CAFR that the auditor distributed, I believe there's also a copy, and I know you received it electronically, of the audit that was complete. Again, kudos to the auditor's office and his staff. And the team, the whole City of Findlay team that make that audit come back with the high marks. A couple of management notes, but those are minor things that they provide feedback to us on a regular basis, so we'll work through those. And then, because everybody needs some positive in their life, I have a new beautiful niece that was born last week, so I'm getting plenty of endorphins through the cute pictures of my niece that I'm receiving on a regular basis. So hopefully you all are as well. And really, I should have led with the COVID stuff. Thank you all for wearing your masks this evening, because we're still heading in the wrong direction. We are seeing a continued increase in hospitalizations, and definitely concerned there. Our community is in pretty good shape when it comes to hospital capacity, but we are starting to see some of the other hospitals in the region asking for our support because of their capacity. So we're keeping a close eye on that. As a reminder, the vaccine is not a hazmat suit that's going to keep you from getting COVID. It is helping your body know how to fight the virus off so that you are hopefully not hospitalized. And so appreciate everyone taking precautions and being aware that it's still out there, and we want to continue to operate as we are now. But that means I need all of you to stay healthy so that you can keep showing up and help and support the city operations. believe the only other thing I would like to remind is I would request that we do an executive session to discuss the legislation related to the property acquisition 2021-86.
Mr. Wobser?
Mayor, what was the start time of the 9/11 Memorial Parade?
9 a.m.
Thank you.
Mr. Stashak?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to mention, and since the mayor would like to meet on the executive time, Councilman Walter, you had asked if any of the councilpersons would like to participate. I guess we should probably throw that back to you. 733.12 says that the auditor shall prescribe the form of the accounts and reports that are rendered to our office, and with regard, and that does include not only the financial system, but payroll, since it is a financial system. So my goal would be to be able to make sure we get the mayor's questions answered. I have a list of those questions. They're pretty one-off, fairly simple, but I don't want to miss an opportunity to include your body in that with regard to any questions you folks might have. And I don't want anybody to believe that it's going to have an operational impact. I don't see the operational impact changing at all, other than to the better and for the significant savings that we're looking at incurring on an annual basis. So let me know if we'd like to do that, and if you want to set that meeting, happy to do that. So we've got a full forum since you folks have voted on that. It's a little bit of money and just do some other things.
Jim, I'm sorry, could you back up just a second? We're talking about the time and a recording system, and your request was what exactly? One more time?
What I'm saying is, since the mayor wants to sit and discuss it, I thought I'd throw it back to you guys. If you want to be part of that discussion, that would be more than appropriate. I want to make sure we get all the questions answered, so we don't end up in a longer than necessary meeting at your next council meeting when we're discussing that when it comes up for the third reading, particularly since this falls directly under the purvey of the auditor's statutory duties.
Very good. I guess unless there's somebody on council that would like to sit in on that meeting, I'll be glad to do that. Just make me aware of the time and place.
Any other new business? Mr. Huss?
Question for Mayor.
Please use your microphone. Thank you.
Okay. Are there gonna be speakers on Saturday?
Service Director Martin, would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, I don't know the extent of every detail, but yes, there are extensive services involved in this short, compact memorial, from bagpipers. We're gonna have lighting of candles that are actually very symbolic of situations on that day. We're gonna have a guest speaker, and forgive me, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but the safety services of this county, as well as the city, will all be represented there that day.
One of the main reasons I ask is you're probably not aware that there were a handful of city employees that made trips around zero to work, so I didn't know if they had been contacted to make sure that they had the opportunity to show.
Well, one thing I like to do is be resourceful when I don't know the answers, and so I got a hold of the individuals that have been involved in the safety services of this city for a very long time. And we're involved in the 10-year anniversary, as well as our AMVET representatives. So I feel I leaned on them to help make sure this was symbolic and all-inclusive to the individuals. So I'm hopeful that those individuals are involved, but I will ask that individual if we've captured that audience. So I appreciate that.
I made 2 trips there, so.
Yep.
And I know we had some firemen who went also, a couple other officers.
So thank you for that point.
Mayor Muir?
Yes, so we do, I won't go through the full agenda, but we will have a speaker, Tom Blanc, and then I know the AMVETS is having a number of folks, and I know that we've also been in conversations with the Courier, who's doing an article talking about it and talking about some of the city employees that participated. But there will also be representatives from every branch of the military there as part of the color guard, carrying their flags and represent. So I think it'll be a really cool event. Trying to keep it relatively short, recognizing there's a lot going on that day in the community as well. But it will be a neat event. Would certainly love your support through that.
Any other new business? real quick, I'd just like to thank everybody for their patience with the new sound system. It obviously started with a couple hiccups. We'll try to adjust that accordingly so that my big fear is if somebody came to the podium, that microphone would not be working this evening, but I promise that that'll be repaired by the next meeting. And hearing that, I will entertain a motion to go into executive session. Mr. Russell.
I would move that we adjourn into executive session to discuss ordinance 2021-086, a property acquisition.
We'll return for business.
Second, Mr. Hellman.
We'll return for business.
Yeah, understand, we will return for business. Okay. Second, Mr. Hellman. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. We return to executive session.
We'll try to be quick then.